Good to see you. It's been a long time.
Yeah, I like the background there.
Yeah, my wife, she's been YouTubing and now I'm YouTubing a bit. She created this green background and
Has a sense of Zen, though, simple as it
yeah,
is.
yeah. Well, she's her whole thing is holistic yoga. In fact, she just ran out the door. She's going to be doing at a school meditation for
Nice.
some a group of students. So she's come a long way in her own spiritual journey.
Really, that's interesting. I always like to hear people's stories.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, people have been following this podcast for a while. She usually does this with me, but because we're been doing so many different things lately, it's been hard to schedule the two of us at the same time. Um, but she came from that, as did I, the real charismatic Christian background, and she was even more charismatic than I was. I mean, full on gifts of the Spirit, really high end, the Toronto Vineyard type thing where people rolling on the ground and everything. And, to go from that to now she's yoga, holistic health, a lot of the things that she would have seen as suspect and borderline demonic 10, 15 years ago. Now she embraces as, a much more healthy lifestyle. So
Yeah, well, there's a lot to say about all that for sure.
I'm sure
You
you
know,
could.
I would.
Yeah.
Well, I Ron Tutt just died the other day, Elvis's drummer, and so there's a lot flying around Facebook on that. He drummed for a lot more people than Elvis, but that's how I knew him.
Mm-hmm.
But that kind of triggered. We went to the same church, the Yorba Linda Vineyard, which is kind of where a lot of that vineyard stuff started. I guess Lonnie Frisbee showed up, and then he had the same kind of thing. God's moving over here, and wave their hand, and people fall down and roll around on the ground and all that stuff. I always wondered where God was moving. I just happened to be sitting in the wrong place that night or something, or or something. I don't know, but it's wild for sure.
Yeah. No, I mean, I had so many experiences like that, and now I look back at them thinking, so much of it I know you and I probably differ on whether there is a God at work at play or not, but I'm the first to willing to concede that in a lot of those environments there was a mass group hypnosis and group thought going on. Yeah. For sure. I still remember, say 20, 25 years ago, I don't know if you remember Rodney Howard-Browne.
Doesn't sound familiar, no.
Yeah, he was a big South African preacher, and he had his moment of fame back in the late 90s. He was going around the world, and he came out to Hong Kong a couple times, had huge meetings that, of course, this was when I was in the thick of it, and would bring groups of my church down. And it was the full on, like you just mentioned, he would call it the Holy Ghost happy hour, people falling out, rolling around, running, just pandemonium. But we all felt it was God moving. And at the time, one of the years, Les Miserables was in town. And I'd gotten to know the star of the show, Stieg Rawson, who was playing Jean Valjean. And we'd had a number of spiritual talks. So I invited him, because he was off during the day, to come and see experience one of these afternoon sessions they were doing. And I still remember afterwards him giving me his feedback going, it was fascinating to me to watch how a group is able to create this environment. Like, he didn't think for a moment that God was really at work. What he found fascinating was this group dynamic of how they're able to create this experience through this, ecstasy. And I remember feeling slightly offended that he wasn't getting the God part of this and God moving. But looking back at that conversation now, I'm thinking, oh no, I totally tacked with where he is. So,
going back to what you said about you and I maybe not believing a lot of the same things about God and what the nature of God and so on. That might be true. In fact, I've gone out on a limb before and said that I think there are as many versions of God as there are people on the planet. But we ought to be able to agree on a few things, and that's what I try to focus on as a former believer. I guess might be one way to put it. That I find no cause for division.
Yeah.
If people want to sacrifice a relationship over a doctrinal belief or a theological position or a belief for that matter, just makes no sense to me at all. So
No, I
yeah,
totally agree. I think you and I, if we, we can get into a whole nother discussion of what is the nature of belief and what does it mean to believe. But I would say if we parsed out what you and I believe, I think one of the reasons we enjoyed chatting with each other and engaged a little bit over the years is we actually believe pretty much along the same lines. And there's a little bit of nuance on a few areas, but I totally concur. I've had Christian friends unfriend me because of my theological position on the inerrancy of Scripture. I mean,
sure.
it's just crazy to me.
Yeah, and that I see that happen all the time. Even I don't know if you're a clergyman or anything like that, but I've seen pastor friends unfriended by other believers and other Christians, and I've certainly had my share of that from people that I thought I knew and loved and had long standing relationships with. And boy, it really comes down to that. Are we really going to put that up on the block just
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I can't make myself believe certain things about the universe and reality
Yeah.
and eternal, our eternal fate and just the whole, I go down the litany of things. But yeah, it turns out that happens a lot. And I'll say this though too, that I'm actually surprised that there are some rather fundamentalist believers that have stuck around. And I'll mention our first singer, Bill Walden, who's a pastor of a Calvary chapel. He's retired now, but we've had some, let's just say, passionate discussions over the years about things, but we've always been able to put that in its place.
Yeah.
And still make music together and still there's nothing about what someone else believes, as long as it's not harmful anyway, that would make me cut someone out of my life that way.
Yeah, no. And it's, you're talking about unfriending people. I just got a message from a longtime Hong Kong American friend who just relocated back to the States. And he just messaged me. He said, "Oh, I got together with so-and-so, this couple. And it was so good to catch up with this couple." And my first thought was, "Oh, you mean the guy that unfriended me about 5 years ago, when even though we'd started this ministry together back in the day and had all this strong relationship." And it's interesting how just those little things. And I thought that didn't matter to this guy. We don't believe the same things anymore, and hence I will unfriend you. I can't have you in my life, which it really, for me, it really bears testimony to the God you're following to begin with. I'm not even sure I want to, follow that God, so to speak.
Right. Yeah. I somewhere in my blog or something, I wrote an article about love being the bigger umbrella. And it seems to me that if you think about, I don't know, nested relationships in the universe, or love being the umbrella that covers us all, to do something like you just described is kind of a lower level. They're putting doctrine or beliefs as the highest umbrella, and that just will never carry the day. I don't care what your faith position is, what religion you're in. And maybe this goes back to what you were saying about you and I perhaps believing a lot of the same things, the same ideas, that your faith is useless. And this is scripture too, Paul. If you don't have love in your life, then you're a clanging cymbal, and really, so your buddy's just a clanging cymbal, or whoever that is, because the higher, I constantly have to strive for that higher level. I don't know what you'd call it, state of being, or the higher level goal for my own humanity.
Yeah.
And that goes beyond what you believe, what I believe, what anyone else believes. The fact that we've all got a heart, we've all got feelings, we've all got hurts, we've all got cracks and damage and scars, and we all need kindness, and It's not a bad life to look for ways that I can bring
Mm-hmm.
a little sunshine to the world and make it better wherever I go, whoever I come in contact with, in whatever capacity.
Yeah. Well, that's a nice segue into what I wanted to have as our kind of theme for this chat. Was a few months ago you wrote a blog piece on turning 65, and I'm always looking for opportunities to chat with you, Joe, and trying to find out
Always a pleasure.
I appreciate that. What's going to be that little branch that we can kind of cling to and have a discussion on. And when I read that, I thought, oh, I want to talk to Joe about this, because you wrote that in May. My father passed away in March, sadly, due to COVID. And so I've thought more about mortality and the limited time I have left on this world, in this life. And I thought, I'd really like to process this with you. And obviously, I ended up going to the States, and we have conflicting schedules. We're finally able to do it. And so I just wanted to kind of, you raised some really great topics as you've mused over your 65 years. And I thought maybe we could touch on those. First one you touched on is therapy. How has therapy been at this stage of life helpful for you?
Good question. And so it's not new for me. I started going, let's put it this way. The first time I ever saw a therapist or visited a therapist was in 1984. So what happened was my life was falling apart in the middle. We were just released our third album in 84, Boys and Girls. And yet my life was falling apart. And that showed up in my marriage. Mm-hmm. And so I called the only person that I knew that had been through that, and that was Randy Stonehill. Mm-hmm. And he was gracious, and he spent a couple hours on the phone with me, and he was right about some things, and he was wrong about some things. He said, your ministry is going to dry up and over this. And of course, that didn't happen. In fact, it was kind of the launching pad onto other things. But he said, call my pastor. And he gave me his number, and I called the guy. His name was Ben Patterson, I think his name was. I haven't seen him since, but this is going back 30 or 40 years. And Ben recommended that I see this Christian counselor because, like you, I was involved in a pretty fundamentalist religion and belief system at Calvary Chapel. So, therapy was one of those bogeymans, open yourself up to demon possession and all this stuff, error. And so I was very strict that it had to be a Christian counselor.
That's right, because counselors are liberals,
That too. All kinds of ways they're going to hell, those guys. But so I went for 6 months or a year or so. This is right around the time Branded was being recorded. And that just opened the door to me understanding that I'm just not, and this goes to the aging thing. So I was maybe 29 or 30 at the time, and became crystal clear to me that I'm just not the person that I want to be at this time of my life, that I'm immature. And while, you can enjoy some success in a Christian band, but for me, I can't speak for the rest of the guys in the band. I felt like at 20 something years old, when our first record came out, we were kind of thrust onto a national stage, and people asking me questions about things that I hadn't really thought about before, biblical things, world things, current events, religious themes and religious trends. And so I was kind of out of my league in a sense emotionally. I mean, the band was fine, but emotionally, I just wasn't mature enough to deal with this. So went for about a year and a half, and then I went again. This is kind of I'll try to be as brief as I can. When I lived in California, I used to go to Mass every day. And they had a Mass at noon, having been born and raised Catholics. They had a Mass at noon up at the Catholic hospital, which was just up the street from my house. And it was just a half an hour mini Mass mostly for the employees at the hospital, because it was a Catholic hospital. So for me, it was just a nice way to set the tone for the day, a meditative half an hour reflection. Well, I'm there one day, and I used to carry this little book with me called the Catholic Book of Prayers. I picked it up in a Catholic bookstore somewhere, and after the Mass, I'm kind of thumbing through it, and it has this one section on how to prepare for confession, and basically it's a list of questions that allow you to search your soul. You know, have I been unkind to anybody? Have I been angry? Have lost my temper? Or any number of those kinds of questions. And I'm going through this list, and to coin a religious term, I kind of had an epiphany that I'm just not the man again or yet that I want to be. So I went home that afternoon, called another counselor, and I was in for 15 years. Just went straight for 15 years. I've said many times that it's made all the difference for me, along with my education, my undergrad in sociology, which I got more for personal reasons than career reasons or anything else like that. But I wanted to understand marriage. I wanted to understand families. I wanted to understand myself. I wanted to know why I had failed in my marriage. At least that's the way I saw it at the time. I was a custodial father, so I wanted to know more about what it's like to raise kids in this culture, and what are the success factors, all those kinds of questions. And so it was a 15-year journey.
Yeah.
That only stopped when I moved to Virginia to take the job at James Madison University. It just, I started going about another year and a half ago. And again, I didn't have any big cataclysmic things I needed to work on or solve. I just think it's a good practice. I just like what it does for me. It's a level of accountability in my life. It's someone I know and can trust. I can be truthful about myself. I can explore areas about myself. And so it really has, I think I worded it. This is the guy that I wrote about in the blog post about the little chime,
Yeah.
The call to reflection and the call to therapy, like a Buddhist, the Buddhist chime to call to meditation. So it's just been great. And I encourage anyone that might be suffering from any kind of mental anguish or mental illness or doubt or any kind of emotional upheaval that to go for it and not be afraid of it, because it's really, really fantastic, and I think shows more strength than anything else.
That's fantastic. I've had it recommended to me in the past. I've never seen a therapist, but I've thought about, maybe I've reached a point where it might be a good thing. And as you share that, it's got me thinking about some things that there's some accounts I'm taking in my own life, having turned 55. I'm 10 years behind you, and there's places I want to be personally with my own self that I'm having some successes in, and I'm having some failures in, and wanting to be the person, like you said, that I want to be. I kind of have I wouldn't say a perfect image of myself, but there are things that I know I would like to do better, that I want to be more aware of, that I want to have less blind spots. And I do have a good group of, maybe one of the reasons that I haven't really sought it out is I do have friends that will push back on me, which is something I've always looked for, but maybe something professional, something I should consider.
Yeah, I there's all kinds of reasons why people do it, and I don't think you really need a reason, really, to tell you the truth. It's just been a good practice for me, and I like to think of it that way, as a practice. And I try to build a number of practices into my life, just like a musician would practice their instrument. We practice mental health, we practice wholeness, and the thing is, Steve, once you start. I've always looked around at other people and thought, man, everyone's so lucky. They've had these great childhoods and they have these successful marriages. They've been been with the same person for 30, 35 years, and their kids look like model kids. And I know it's a fool's errand to compare myself to others, and that you never know what's going on behind the scenes. But I always felt that somehow I got dealt a different hand than most other people. course, it's true that we all have cracks, as Leonard Cohen says. That's how the light gets in. And once you start talking about something, some area in your life that you're not completely satisfied with or you think needs work, man, all this other stuff starts coming up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So therapy has been great for me that way. And it's nothing to be afraid of, really. It's, and I think a lot of people are afraid. And so this argument, well, I don't really have anything to work on. Well, that's fine too. But for me, it's been a good practice.
That's good. That's good to know. That's good to know. Just looking down your list, let's move on to currency. You mentioned currency, but you started about talking about money at first, but then you switched to time. Maybe elaborate on that.
Yeah, well, some of that's my MBA coming through because, I even think in terms of economics with songwriting, because you use one word and it's going to cost you another word to use that word. So it's always a trade-off of but the word currency, implies immediately cash or money. And so I've noticed that as I've gotten older, I've been lucky. I've had a good career, and I feel fulfilled that way, and I feel very fortunate that I've been able to have that career focused on music, and then helping other people make music my whole life. But the older I get, the more focus has shifted from wealth to a different kind of wealth, and that's this currency of time that I don't know about you at 55, but the older I got, I could just watch it happen year after year after year, sometimes day after day after day, that I have a sense of urgency about the time that I have left, because it's not much, and it's going to be gone faster than I realize. You wake up one morning and you're fucking 65 years old, or whatever. And
tell me it's not going to happen. 65.
Yeah, right.
I would have said that about 55.
You'll say 55 forever. Don't worry.
Yeah.
So that currency really, and then I think I talked about how we spend it, how we spend our time. We spend it like we spend money. And I was thinking about this today when you suggested that we might be talking about this, that when you're out of money, you still have time. But when you're out of time,
that's it.
You're out of luck,
Yeah.
So that really has become the currency in my life. And how do I want to spend that time? And what am I willing, and more importantly, not willing to do to that eats up some of that?
Joe, coming back to even the therapy part, one of the struggles or tensions Tammy and I have had in our marriage, and we've been together almost 30 years. We're one of those couples, but I'll be frank, and I've been very frank with people we've counseled. There was one point in our marriage, we were just about ready to go our separate ways, and we still have our bumpy patches. And, for whatever reason, the coin flipped and we were able to keep it together. But we're going through a bit of a thing right now. And if I'm really honest, a lot of it has to do with, Tammy would say a couple times that I am still grieving over my dad. I wouldn't say that. My grief for my dad is not like this incapacitating grief. If anything, my dad lived a great life. He was a great dad. I was very sad. I shed my tears. But now when I think of him, like nearly every day, it's always with joy in my face. What it has done to me that is maybe not as helpful is it really hit me. He's 25 years older than I am. So, and granted, he was in good health. He should have lasted longer. COVID hit him the wrong way and took him. But it started me thinking, I've got 25 years plus left. What do I want to do with this? There's things that what am I not doing now that I want to be doing? There's things that I'm spending my time on that don't really bring me a lot of fulfillment. And so I'm fine. I get more frustrated. When I get frustrated, Tammy picks up on it. We end up fighting. And it becomes this circle. And if I had to be self-aware, my issue right now is there's things I want to do and I feel like I can't because of certain other things. And I want to, and it's that pressing feeling of time and urgency. And I know I went through this phase in the late 30s. I would have anxiety attacks because I wasn't in the stage of my life. I'd come out of being a missionary. I'd felt like I'd wasted years. There was places I wanted to be. And I really came to this place of contentment. I had to, using a biblical metaphor, I had to wander in the desert a while, around Mount Sinai a few times to learn some lessons. And a lot of it had to do with my ego and where I felt I should be in a status place in a number of areas. And when I came to this contentment that as long as I have the love of my family, I've got the love of my friends, I've got a secure roof over my head and food in my belly. Why am I striving for more than that? Learn to be content, Steve. And that really did carry me through for a number of years. I could bore you with some anecdotes that I'd kind of achieved. Like I felt like, okay, I reached this level. And now I feel like this same issue is rearing itself back in my life again under a different premise, a different situation. And I don't know yet what to do with it.
Yeah. Wow. The defining moment in my life was when my mother died, and she died of cancer when she was 57. And I know that our drummer Gary lost his dad, and it's still, this was well over 15 or 20 years ago, and it's been a defining moment in his life too, even still to this day. So those kinds of things can really help, or cause us to take stock and inventory where our life, our own mortality and temporalness, if you will. I'm just sorry to hear about your dad more than anything.
Thank you. Thanks. It was, we're going to get to family on your list in a bit, but it's, I guess we can weave in and out of these, but it also reinforced in me how valuable family is. And we couldn't get home initially because of COVID and the pandemic, but we got back in June for 3 weeks, and we had the family, and my brother Andy and Matt and their families and some other family, we all congregated at a little farm cemetery in the middle of rural Iowa, which is where a lot of the family's buried. And we spent 4 days together, and we went to a minor league baseball game after the memorial service because my dad loved baseball, and we're in Iowa and Field of Dreams. And I won't bore you with everything, but it was a magical time, and it really reinforced in me what was important. And family is just so key. Watching cousins together and watching aunts and uncles together and shedding tears together and holding each other and being with each other during grief made the grief bearable. And so I know in when you kind of mused on family, you've really come to similar conclusions about the value of family.
Yeah, and I'm not where I want to be either. I have a friend in Portland who's flying out tomorrow to a memorial service for one of her best friends that died in her 50s of double pneumonia, not COVID related. Just she came down with it. A week later, she's dead in the hospital, married, 2 kids. So it's a bit of a platitude that, well, you never know when it's going to hit. We all kind of stumble through life thinking, well, we could die tomorrow. And I don't mean to go down that bunny trail, true as it is, but it does the fact that we don't know. I wrote this blog post knowing full well that as long as there have been human beings, they've been thinking about all this stuff. And I don't know that I have any earth-shattering new truths to add to it other than to tell my story and to maybe hope that, like my songs, that it helps some other people as well.
Well, it helped me because I read it at that juncture where it most would have impacted me, because the issues you're raising, even though I'm 10 years behind you, they're just as real for me. And they were brought home with my dad's death. I'm walking around with you touch about health and the health issues, that as you age, People see me, and I've walked across Europe and I've walked across Spain twice. What they're not seeing is I need a hip replacement and I'm walking around with a cane now. I look like an old man walking around Hong Kong. And I actually get tired of people asking me what's wrong with my leg. It's like I want to hang a sign around me explaining it so I don't have to explain it again. And
Yeah.
I hate getting old.
We don't have much choice. And, as they say, it's not for the wimpy either. It's not for the squeamish. It's been talking about the health thing. So it's 65. I mean, I quit smoking 31 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I hope that was the end of that, because that can always come back and bite you in the ass later.
Yeah.
But it was 31 years ago. I played sports in high school. I was a basketball player in my first year at college also. But then when the band started, then you're driving around the country in a bus and you're locked in this bus with 9 other guys, and just out of sheer boredom, you're eating bad food because Denny's is the only thing that's open in the middle of Kansas at 2 a.m. So get the Grand Slam.
And $1.99 back then.
And, cigarettes and cigars. And so the lifestyle, there are a lot of lifestyle hazards here. But when I quit smoking, obviously that you worry that you're going to blow up in weight, and I didn't want that to happen. And I had a background, like I said, in sports. And so I just immediately started working out, and I just never stopped, kind of like Forrest Gump that way. So 31 years I've been doing this. I've been going to the gym and running 5 and 6 days a week. Well, I can't run anymore because I've got knees that are like your hip.
Yeah.
But you find other ways to do it. And my weight has been good, and I don't have a litany of medicines that I need to take or anything. And I know a lot of people do. I consider myself lucky that way. When I go into the doctor, for one small example, I've watched my bad cholesterol inch up, and I said, "What the hell? I'm a vegan. Mm-hmm. I work out 6 days a week. I'm not overweight. What the hell?" He says, "Genetics."
Oh.
I think I mentioned that in the blog post too.
You did.
What are you going to do? You can't do anything about that. So I want to go. I've seen I've seen people decline in health because they start paying the consequences of bad lifestyle choices for years and years and decades, and then, I wish I knew. Kind of like the COVID thing. I wish I had gotten vaccinated. Well, yeah, I wish you had too. There's nothing I can do about whatever ailment people have at the end of their life that's going to get the better of, that's going to catch up with them finally, other than today to say, man, it's going back to the currency thing. You've got time, and this is the best way I know to extend your bank account that way, so to speak.
Like yourself, I developed a lot of bad habits when I was younger because you don't feel the consequences of your decisions when you're younger. You can eat the $1 meal at McDonald's 4 times a week when you're 25 because you don't feel it the next day. It doesn't affect your waistline that much. But as you get older, the effects really kick in. And, like yourself, after I reread the article, I think you and I have a lot of health. I'm not quite vegan, but I've become flexitarian. We're much more plant-based in our household now. Tammy's really helped a lot with that. And like currency, where I've become more mature and mindful and responsible with finances in my older years, investing rather than spending on stuff. With health, I'm doing something similar. I wish I'd done it years earlier, but sometimes you can't tell young people, that kind of thing, but you can start today. And I'm drinking less alcohol. I've lost weight. I still got about another 20 plus pounds to lose, but I'm watching the scale move down, as not because I'm trying to do some radical diet, but just because I'm trying to drink less alcohol, which has been a problem in Hong Kong. It's such a social place. It was getting to the point where I was having a beer or a glass of wine or something, just every day. And you mentioned you stopped drinking and smoking, which I applaud. I haven't got to that place where I've stopped drinking, but I'm really trying to curtail it, because I find that when I have a few drinks, it's not just the calories and the health issues in the drinks, but my food choice decisions after a couple beers diminishes greatly as well.
Yeah, I've actually never drank.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I've never had a beer in my life. I just don't like alcohol at all. So I'm lucky that way.
Yeah. And to be in a
Yeah,
band, how did that work? I
I
guess
know.
smoking you kind of covered it with smoking, but
I did, and you know I tell my students all the time I make a shitty rock star because I don't drink and I never have, and neither does Jim, by the way. So
okay.
our band is kind of teetotalers that way. But I've also never done drugs. I mean, smoked pot a handful of times when I was a kid.
Yeah.
But I knew when I quit smoking 30 years ago that I needed to stop smoking everything. And I wasn't smoking pot on at least on a regular basis, but I knew that pipes, cigars, anything that I inhaled was off the table, because I knew that if I allowed myself that was going to be, I'd be right back into tobacco. So I lucked out with my distaste for alcohol. Plus, it gives me headaches. So, I mean, I liked wine. I'd have a glass of wine once in a while, but I haven't done that in decades.
Okay. Yeah. See,
So,
I
and
love
it's
my
not.
wine.
What's that?
I said I love my wine, but I gave up smoking when I got tongue cancer. I wasn't a cigarette smoker. I was a heavy cigar smoker. And January 2007, I was diagnosed with tongue cancer, and I stopped smoking from that. And it's interesting when they cut off a little part of your tongue, and you make kind of a living by speaking, how much that's a wake up call to something's got to
I bet.
radically change. People
Yeah.
ask me, how did you quit smoking? So I just said, tongue cancer. Yeah. And it's been about 15 years since I've
Yeah.
had a cigar. And I have friends.
Congratulations on that, man.
Oh, thank you. And to you likewise, giving up
Thanks.
all those years of smoking. But I'll have friends around me smoking, especially cigars down on the beach. And now they know that it's not a big deal, but I actually like the secondhand smoke. I'll say, can I sit next to you? I like that smell of cigar, because that's the closest I can get to it. But
Right.
and they'll offer me, they'll say, oh, Steve, come on, what's one cigar? But I know I don't want to open that barn door.
This it kind of, I don't mean, but I'm not saying any of this to pat myself on the back. I mean, there's this kind of caricature of vegans that, oh, well, they'll let you know if they're vegan or not. So I don't talk about it much. And I don't talk about not drinking either, because if I'm out with people and they want to have beer, wine, whatever, or a cocktail, knock yourself out. This is just my choice.
Mm-hmm.
It's just my choice. I don't want to moralize it or make anybody wrong for I mean, the meat thing, the vegan thing is, I've made that choice for health reasons, but for ethical reasons also. Yeah. Those are just my choices. Mm-hmm. And I'm happy with them. They've got me where I need to be in my life at this point. But so there's that. And actually the meat thing, there's I went to the dentist once after I'd stopped years ago when I cut meat out altogether. And I went to the dentist and she said, are you vegetarian? And I said, yeah, why? How'd you know? And she says, well, I can tell by your tissues. They're just much healthier. And it kind of blew me away. So it does have, besides the ethical angle, which I'm sure people would disagree with me on that, and that's fine. This is kind of another angle, but there were tangible benefits to doing that too. But the other angle that I was going to say is this moralizing idea that I don't feel compelled. I talked to my counselor about this the other day, that my whole life I've been driven by a sense of mission, mm-hmm. a sense of purpose. First it was save the world in the band, and the Great Commission and all that stuff, and preach the gospel and do altar calls. My mission is to raise my kids, my to love them as boldly and dearly as I can, to succeed in my marriages, plural. And all of my missions have either vaporized. I'm not trying to save the world for Jesus anymore. My kids are grown, and they need me still, but they need me differently than they did when they were 8 and 10 years old.
Right.
And probably, maybe they're listening to this, I don't know, but I probably need them more than they need me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a hard thing to do until you get old enough to have kids that are adults and on their own and raising their own families. And you see that, yeah, it's as John the Baptist said, they have to increase and I have to decrease, and as we age. But the idea of moralizing and a sense of mission and trying to find a sense of purpose at this point in life. I mean, 65 is not that old by any means. I'm 17 years under the life insurance actuarial tables, but that versus we could go at any time. I've always felt like I was going to live to be close to 100, but given that, how do I define a life for myself going forward from here when the band is still those relationships are still active and current, but what we did as a band is a lot of it's nostalgia, and even though it might still be meaningful to people, I still get letters from people that just discovered our records, and this song and that song meant this and that to me, and it helped me in this and that way, and that's great, but that's not me doing anything today actively to make the world a better place. And so how do I find and create for myself a sense of purpose? And what does that look like? That's kind of that's a good practice too, born out of meditation and therapy and reading. And I've written about my ears also. My ears are getting worse year after year, and so that affects my ability to write songs and what pitches I can hear and pitch relationships. And so who am I and where do we go? And this idea that I don't feel like I have to moralize anymore.
Right.
There's no point in it.
The funny thing is, even when I was big in the fundamentalism evangelical world, I was never a big moralizer back then. I think I fell into the trappings of the environment around me at times, and I'm embarrassed to say I probably said and did some things that I regret now. But by and large, the character that you kind of know now was still very much there. It was just in a different environment. And once I was able to free myself of that environment, I was able to flourish. And I think in many ways you're similar, Joe, is that my guess is a more flourishing Joe emerged from what you came out of. And wouldn't it be wonderful, even as we're sharing this, we're talking about the degeneration of our physical bodies and the impact it has, but our self-awareness and the wisdom and our ability to not be cast to and fro with every wind of craziness around us. That's really valuable. I found I would give anything to have the wisdom and years and experiences that I've gleaned put back in a 25-year-old body. I would just be wonderful. It's like there's this trade-off as you get older. This diminishes the physical, but I'm not even just saying the mental. It's a greater understanding of how things connect and the priorities, what's important and what's not important, what's worth spending time with and what's not worth spending time with. Much more aware and sensitive to those things than I ever was when I was younger.
Yeah, it's interesting that you just used the term spending time, and you talked about spending 4 days in Iowa. Mm-hmm. It's that idea of currency again, and time as currency that we spend. And I think you're absolutely right. How do you want to spend what time you have left when you don't know what that quantity looks like? The religion thing, or the spiritual side of that, if you want to talk about it that way, it's just I've noticed that I famously quote my friend. I don't know if I think he's your friend too. Brian Quincy Newcomb. He's a UCC pastor in Dayton, Ohio. We go way back, Quincy and I. he's a rock critic also, and he was one of the founder of the magazine Harvest Rock Syndicate out of Chicago at the time, back in the mid 80s. But he has this great saying that you don't have to attend every argument you're invited to.
Mm-hmm.
And I just love that saying. That when I first got on social media, people carry around a snapshot of the you they knew once upon a time.
Yeah.
But when social media showed up, and for me, that was, I don't know, 14, 15 years ago, a lot had happened in my life and I wasn't that same person anymore. And then the whole having dismissed my faith, I did a lot of arguing, and I always had to balance whether how much of this is just arguing
Mm-hmm.
versus how much am I trying to explain what I believe and why and what happened and what the process was. I'm much less inclined to want to argue and debate anybody now. Believe what you want.
Yeah.
And as I said, as long as it's not harmful, but the minute it's harmful, I'm going to be on your ass about it.
Yeah.
Or not just your ass, but the belief system that gets us to causing harm for other humans and other families. But Steve, I gave religion such short shrift in that blog post, and maybe we can link to it somewhere. But it hardly interests me even anymore to talk
Mm-hmm.
about things like sin and hell and salvation, and even the most liberal and progressive of believers and Christians that I know fall into this trap
Mm-hmm.
of I mean, the minute you bring up God, you're going to cause a division. Understand that. And I don't
Yeah.
mean you, but I
No, but
mean,
I understand.
it's going to cause division. The minute you bring up God, even if it's the most innocuous reference or anything like that. So I think that has to be navigated, and most people just don't navigate it well.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's been that you bring up the idea of flourishing. I do feel like there's that term backsliding, that when you dismiss your faith, you've gone somehow backwards. Not at all for me. It's growth by leaps and bounds. Once I could finally dismiss the superstitions, the things that are the objective claims of the universe that have no evidence for them or proof at all, the conjecture. And by the way, I don't mean to criticize your belief, and I hope you don't take it that way, because
not at all.
I'm talking about what I dismissed in my thinking. The fact is that belief, it almost needs to be just a personal thing, and you don't have to. What do you have to talk about at all? Unless it's, why bring it up at all?
Yeah.
Unless you're either trying to convince someone that your version of God is right, or why can't we frame that in the best religion can do is aspire to what secular ethics has already done, or where it already is. That's my opinion, and I think that if there are ways where people like Jesus was revolutionary in how he treated women or the widows, or the marginalized, then okay, that's great. But a lot of people have done things like that, have caused caused major shifts in our thinking. Martin Luther King, about morals and ethics and how people should be treated. And we can get there without causing the division of, well, Jesus is the path that will get you to God.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, that's it's I've wondered at times, Joe, why I'm not, like, I've asked my brother this. I said, why am I not? I mean, I believe in Christ. I believe in, it's hard to say what I believe because it's more experiential. I think I kind of tack with what Brian McLaren said recently, or I heard him say recently, when he was asked why he didn't follow some of his other contemporaries and peers who have questioned in many ways and have left the faith altogether. And he said something to the effect of, I suppose I could have gone that way, but I had certain experiences in my life that's kept me kind of on this side of the fence. Although I totally understand those that chuck the whole thing. That's kind of the way I am, is that Yeah, I always love the movie Contact with Jodie Foster, when James Woods says to her at the court at the end, you, as a sign, why don't you admit that this thing could have been made up, that you were deluded, that this and this. And she says, yes, I have to admit, as a scientist, that everything you said could be absolutely true. And then he says, well, why don't you just say it then? And she goes, because I can't. I experienced something that I can't quite put my finger on. And that's why I can't. And for me, that is the thing. It doesn't make me better or worse. All I can say is it's my experience. And there's an attraction to kind of go completely where maybe you and my brother have gone. I find there's a notion of that attractive. But like Jodie Foster, I can't. But as as a person of reason, I certainly have to concede, there could be no God. This could be something, I'm part of a cultural, ethnic structure that I have been weaned in, and it's so part of my DNA that I can't objectively tell what's right or wrong, or up or down, or north or south. So I'll give grace where I can, as much as I can, and fall into what Peter, First John says, God is love, and anybody who is in love is in God. And to me, that binding principle is, and you mentioned it earlier with Paul, and unfortunately that Corinthians verse gets kind of overplayed at weddings about love, if there be tongues, if there be all these other things, but if you don't have love, it's like a clanging cymbal. And what's interesting is that always gets invoked at weddings, but Paul wasn't addressing a couple getting married with that. He was talking about a community of people that were struggling to act like a community, and telling them how they're, you're going to have all these divisions. At the end of the day, you're all seeing through glass dimly anyhow. No one objectively has an understanding of what's up, down, north, south, in or out. The one thing that can unite you, that you can see on this side of that dim veil, is that love is what you need. And so I think that's where you and I share the same religion, if I can dare to say that.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully your beliefs make you a better person. It really comes down to that. And I'm going to go back to this. Jesus as the path. There's all kinds of cultural reasons why people believe what they believe, and certainly we all have to admit that geography is a big factor. Where you're born has a lot to do with what you believe. And so I could go down the list of, well, here's that fact, and it's not really controversial. It's easy to prove that religions cluster geographically around cultures and areas and things like that. But there's other things. Family, we it's almost like, gosh, if I leave my faith, it's like divorcing my family. I can't do that. My dad was a minister, and there's so many reasons why. And I would never argue with that. I would never tell people, don't then hold your belief. I think when we start making assertions, though, because it's never just, okay, I believe in Christ. I could drill down, and I don't mean to put you on the hot seat, nor would I ever want to do this unless we were you could have a beer and I'll have an iced tea at a restaurant.
Yeah.
I'd say, well, what is it that you actually believe?
Yeah.
And then when you start drilling down into the assertions that those beliefs invariably lead to, that's where we have problems. That's where people like me and probably your brother have problems with what most people believe. So as I said, it's almost like even the most progressive and liberal of Christians fall into this trap where they say that this is the right way, this is the Jesus I know, and this is, I found this to be the path of God. But there's many fewer tentative statements like that than I would prefer to see. So, I've never sensed from you, for example, that you're a proselytizer or
No.
I think we have to have a sense of humility about what we want to believe. And I would never cop to wanting to convert people to atheism or help people out of their faith. Although sometimes people do need.
Yeah.
I get phone calls all the time. I think we might have talked about this before, because I'm safe. I'm not beholden to the Christian industry anymore, or to any church or anything else. So I get musicians calling me rather often saying, "Hey, I got a real problem here because I just don't believe this shit anymore." And yet,
I'm only one half a foot in, and I get similar. Maybe not a week or two ago, I had a pastor tell me, who I'd been recommending, "Hey, I think you should read this. I think you should read this. Or I think you should listen to this." And he was always, yeah. And then he was really honest with me. He says, "Steve, the reason I don't want to read these things and do these things is I can't afford to question like you do." I mean, it's what he told me. I can't afford to question like you do.
That's just a pitiful place to be in life,
yeah.
I think.
Yeah. And, coming back to something, I opened up something about my brother when I asked my brother this. He said to me, I didn't finish. He said to me, "Steve, I think one of the reasons we don't feel the same thing from you as maybe some other Christians is you don't believe that people are going to go to hell if they don't believe your way. That most Christians deep down believe if you're not a Christian, you're going to go to hell. And so there is this, even when they say they're not going to proselytize, they have this proselytizing response to everything." And that I think that's a fairly fair statement, because in my mind, if Jesus is who I think he is, the Son of God, and as a thought experiment, he went around and I've used this when I've tried to make a point, even in my workplace. If, as I've said, if Jesus was here, went around our place here, and I asked him, "Jesus, will you pull out the people who are following you or primarily looking to your way?" I said that group would not be a Christian group. There'd be a few Christians in there. There'd be some atheists. There'd be some Hindus, some Taoists. Those followers of Jesus's way. And I think sometimes evangelicalism has conflated Christianity. It's a theological assertion to certain beliefs, some statement of faith. When Jesus said, "Just come follow me," hey, if you got an extra coat, you see somebody who's cold, give them the coat. That's the Jesus way. That was what he was teaching. He wasn't going around saying, you even said to Peter, "Who do the people say that I am?" Well, some say you're this, some say you're that. Jesus didn't freak out about that. "Well, who do you say that I am?" "I think you're the Son of God." "Oh, okay." If Peter had said, "Hey, I think you're one of the best teachers I've ever heard," I don't think Jesus would have freaked out about like that. That's the important part, is how you're engaging with other people. How are you showing love and kindness and generosity and compassion and patience and self-control in your family, in your communities? And for me, one of the fundamental problems in Christianity is they completely miss the point of what Jesus was talking about.
So why don't we just talk about those things then, Steve? Why don't we just talk about passion and compassion and empathy and love and forgiveness and grace? Why do we have to frame it in some immediately dividing kind of, and it's not just atheists versus Christians.
No, yeah.
It wouldn't take me a New York minute to start an argument among Christians in a thread on Twitter or Facebook or whatever. Just to say something about the most innocuous of questions. "Oh, can you lose your salvation?"
Yeah. To me, that's,
and off to the races we go.
To me, that even that question is so uninteresting to me. Like, that is so, that's not even a thing where, when you asked, if we, had a beer and you were asking what I believed. That's why I really enjoy the teachings. I follow a lot of Peter Rollins, because he really gets into, you don't even really know what you believe. Like, if we're honest, you don't know what you believe. I like to joke with people. Well, you could tell me, give me 5 minutes of what you believe, but let me follow you around for a month. Let me be with you every place you go, everything you do for the next month, and I'll tell you what you believe. you know, it's
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
And it plays out of the treasure of the heart, the mouth speaks, so to
yeah,
speak. Right?
yeah.
It shows up, and you don't have to tell me what the treasure of your heart is because it'll show up.
It will, it
Yeah.
will. And I think that's where, you know, and you asked a good question. Well, why don't we just talk on these things? And what's funny is I would say primarily it's those fruit that I do talk about, you know, and that I'm happy with other Christians to get into a theological discussion on something. But even that, I'm taking a course right now in Revelation, and it's a late night Zoom class, and I pick it up usually the next day on video. And you know, there's a small group, and you know, they're not arguing; they're having this discussion on which John really wrote Revelation. And if I'm honest, I don't care. I don't give a shit. It
It's
doesn't.
how many angels dance on the head of a
Yeah,
pin.
I don't. And for some of them, it's a really important thing. And God bless them. I don't even mean to sound like I'm mocking it. We all have things that interest us. That there's things that I'm sure interest you. I have no interest in, vice versa. Sure. We live in a diverse world, but I'm finding is I talk less and less when I'm talking about the things I really care about. I'm not really saying, hey, how can I introduce Jesus into your life? I'm thinking, how can I be kind to this person? Or more reflective, you know, I don't think I was as kind as I could have been in that situation. I don't think I offered as much grace in that. I'm really trying to be self-reflective on that. And it's not, oh, as a Christian, I should do this. No, just as a human being who's kind of pledged to follow in the way that Jesus taught, I should have acted better in that situation.
Right. That's what I was trying to get at earlier when I talked about the umbrella and that love being the at the top level, and all these other discussions are kind of underneath that. That if we talk about, you and I can talk about how to be kind to other people and what's worked for us to help us get into a place where we're more fertile that way. Mm-hmm. Practices that we have, you have different practices than I have, but maybe this has worked for you, that's worked for me. Mm-hmm. And that's the top umbrella, to think about love and mercy and all these things. But then we start digging into the things that, like I said, immediately cause division. The Book of Revelation. Well, you know where that's.
Yeah.
That's, so anyway, but we would agree, and we would be great friends. But people just can't, as I said, even the most progressive and liberal Christians just can't seem to help themselves.
Yeah.
I've got to get the Jesus brownie point in there, and then, you know, okay, well, I'm sorry, I would really like to empathize with the loss of your friend or whatever it is. But if you're going to wrap that all up in some kind of theology, then I wish you well, but we don't have a basis to discuss it.
I find you know, sometimes, Joe, my belief is a spectrum. And sometimes I use the language, and you may even see it sometimes on my Facebook and wonder where I'm coming from, but I can maybe explain it a little bit. I don't think I'm being hypocritical when I use certain language with a person that needs to hear this language. And I don't feel like I'm misrepresenting myself, because my faith spectrum is fairly broad. And so, you know, it's the same thing. You know, I live in Hong Kong. I'm with a bilingual speaker. A Chinese only speaker comes in. That person speaks Chinese to them because it's what they'll understand. I realize sometimes I would try to force people into my understanding, and it wasn't always successful. And so sometimes I try to use a language that they'll understand better in order to help create a bridge to them, and maybe to an outside person or an outside viewer. Maybe my brother, yourself, would think, oh, you know, maybe Steve is still in the evangelical trappings. And maybe that's a valid charge. I don't know. But I could say that a lot of times when I do those types of things, it's to be a peacemaker rather than a divider.
Sure. And I agree with you. I think there's a lot of value in that. And I use biblical metaphors all the time too. Mm-hmm. And just because we speak in those terms, I use Buddhist metaphors as well also. Truth is truth, no matter where you find it. It's when I feel that there's a doctrine or a dogma, maybe is a better way to put it, or kind of a universal truth that's specific to this religion, that's when I start having problems. And even there, so what? I have problems. I don't want to spend my time dealing with what someone else, so it's going back to that. I'm not going to argue it point of view again.
I've noticed yourself, myself, even my brothers have, or Andrew particularly, have diminished their social media provocations. I'll speak for myself. I've made a conscious effort to do that. And from my view in the bleachers, it seems like you have to a degree as well.
Yeah, well, certainly the political landscape has changed in the last year or so. And that I did just like, I don't want to spend my time arguing with people about religion. And I've got my political views, and there's the button to unfollow if you don't like it. So knock yourself out. I just don't want to spend my time that way. And at the same time, I do want to tell my story. So
it's a tension, and it's a tension. Joe, I could go on another hour, but I'm just realizing I don't want this to be an unwieldy long podcast. But just, I'm going to give you the final word. There's some topics, but there's still consumerism, sex, choose your state. You kind of touched on work and retirement. Just in closing, is there anything you'd like to address in those topics before we buen camino?
Boy.
I opened up Pandora's box and then said, hey, can you close with that?
Yeah, well, the sex thing is interesting just because it changes as we age. Physiologically, we change, but also it changed. What it means to us changes. So that's been a real aha for me, without going into any graphic detail or anything like that. Consumerism, this goes back to the idea, Steve, that you were talking about. I can't remember the context, but I find that another part of getting older is that I find myself more and more out of touch with kind of mainstream values. And it's a little bit worrisome. And certainly, as America has shifted over the last 2 or 3 years, I'm certainly more and more out of alignment with American values. And that's where I live. So I do feel a bit of a social misfit that way, or a cultural misfit. I go to Costco because I can get a tray of organic apples for dirt cheap, and they have a lot of berries there and stuff like that. But my God, you walk up and down the aisles of just all the crap.
Yeah.
People load up their carts with this shit, and as if it, again, it gets back to the idea of meaning and purpose. And great, you want to buy that? I'm not going to criticize you, but what it means for me, if I were to buy that stuff, is that it becomes my prison. So the accumulation, it's just a value system that I think it's troubling, because when I think about where I point myself, what direction I point myself at 65 in terms of mission and purpose, is largely driven by how I think about my place in the world, and how much of my values I share with the people nearest me, and those kinds of things. So I don't know, it's a lesson, and maybe in God willing, if I live another few years, I'll have another, maybe more insights. But this is kind of my view of the landscape at 65 anyway. I want to live a good life. I want my kids to miss me when I'm gone. And I want people to say, that guy, I didn't agree with him on a lot of stuff, but he's made my life better somehow.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward. You just the small interactions we've had, you've made my life better, Joe. And
thank you, Steve.
I appreciate your thoughtful and graceful attitude, even towards people like myself that's maintain our faith, or that Christian. I'm stumbling for words here in the later innings, but
well,
I think you get the point.
I admire you sharing you've been married 30 years, and trouble. Every 30-year marriage has had bumpy spots. I grant you that, and and yet you've been able to make it work up until today. And so I admire you, and your life has been an example to people like me also. So not to lose hope, and to have the discussion and to build bridges, bridges of kindness and common, where, you know, what we have in common versus what divides us. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful for every chance we get to chat. It's always fun.
Great. I'm looking forward to when we can do it for real. You know, we did a road trip. I hadn't been to the States in 4 years, and we came back for my dad's memorial. And being in Iowa, we'd rented a car in New Orleans, and I had not driven a car in 8 years, Joe. 8 years since I'd last driven a car. And I drove 4,000 miles across 10 states. I can't tell you how much fun we had. My son, Gabriel, who I would love you to meet someday, he just got his degree in music production.
Oh, great.
He was our DJ for the 4,000 miles. And then he at first made us listen to the Beastie Boys audiobook, their memoir. And we actually fell in love with it driving, you know, and, but we saw a couple different friends along the way. And I thought, oh, I would love to see you at some point. But time just didn't allow for it. But I do look forward to that day in the future.
Well, hopefully we'll get it. I did sit down with your brother. He probably told you that.
Yes. Yeah.
In Utah. But standing invitation, if you're ever here in the Pacific Northwest or in Virginia, when I happen to be out there teaching.
Yeah.
Standing invitation.
That'd be wonderful. That'd be fantastic. Joe, as we always say, buen camino at the end. And now we're on YouTube. This will be on YouTube and a podcast. So thanks so much for giving me your time. And
thank you for inviting me. And best to Tammy also.
Thanks. And let's do this again soon.
Always open.
Love to your family.
Pleasure, Steve. Thank you.
Cheers.